Feels like so long since we got to say this, and yet then twice in quick succession, Wales have won a rugby match at senior international level, and not against the Queensland Reds.
Yeah.
Wales beat the Wallaroos this weekend. It was a huge result, the first win under Sean Lynn since he came in. Obviously, he had quite a difficult year previously under Ewan Cunningham. Sean Lynn came in at like 4 days' notice. He was hungover for one of them. Gloucester Hartpury haven't won the league days beforehand. He's come in, he's now finally had some time with the players, and they produced a huge win, whereas his first ever win in Australia.
Yeah, absolutely huge. It felt like a big moment. I know it wasn't the strongest Wallaroos team. I know they had a handful of players missing. However, you can't, beggars can't be choosers with this in terms of Wales. And above all, the performance was there.
Yeah.
Like, from a Welsh perspective, it felt like a great performance. And it was our best in a couple of years from a Welsh perspective. There have been a couple of games where we've sort of crept through, we being Wales, sorry, where Wales have slightly, Wales have slightly crept through, and that they've kind of crept to a result when the opposition have kind of given away, had poor discipline or given away some tries or whatever. And it's not felt fully complete, whereas that felt good.
You look at the games Wales have won over the last couple of years, right? And they beat Spain last year, where Spain were in the game and looked like they could have won it, but they ran out of steam and they just weren't as fit as Wales. So Wales ended up running with that game in the last 20 minutes.
Spain hadn't warmed up for that game at all as well.
Yeah,
so
Spain were coming in undercooked. They had had a much less professional setup than Wales.
Wales had a proper advantage going into that.
And then Italy, where Wales looked like they were going to lose it for the whole game last year, this is, and then won it with a play, 2 minutes out from the final whistle, and then almost still lost it after that. And then they beat Australia in the final play last year as well. It was their first ever win.
And they beat Japan in WXV.
Japan, of course.
Yeah.
But all of Japan again gave them proper fight for a half.
Yeah.
And none of those games Wales were comprehensively better.
I don't think we played that well in the Japan game in WXV and kind of crept through it again.
However, this game, Wales were the better team for, I'd say, 70 of the 80 minutes.
Yeah.
And there was 10 minutes before play was interrupted by a thunderstorm, in which Wales were kind of shaky.
Yeah.
And Australia got on top and they scored an early try and they had another one disallowed. And then from there, Wales really grew into the game and they're already starting to a little bit when Crowd got held over the line before we came into the break. And then they came back from it. And Wales were a different team, and they were fired up, and they were passionate, and they went at it, and they were accurate in defence, and they changed. They'd had an issue twice in the early stage. Whenever Wales went to width, we were seeing them really struggle in the contact area. They were playing with that edge forward step properly. They weren't getting, Georgia Evans ended up moving into that position out wide. They clearly changed it. Switched who was playing the edge forward from someone not hitting there. We can't know because they weren't there, right?
Yeah.
But whoever was supposed to be the edge forward in that first period wasn't getting there. Either Georgia Evans got bollocked and moved in and did that, or someone was able to do that. Wales was able to retain their ball better. They got more accurate at the breakdown. We saw those backs actually getting more aggressive at the breakdown in a way I think a couple times they stood off in that first 10 minutes. And it felt like they managed to fix up every issue in a way that normally some coaches can fix a few of the team's issues at half-time. Yeah. They got a chance to do basically all of them 10 minutes in
100%.
to see how they're playing, see how Australia are going to attack them and change those after 10 minutes.
100%. Both Georgia Evans and Beth Ann Lewis as well, who adapts really well. At Gloucester Hartpury, because Gloucester Hartpury play for a 1-3-2-2 system most of the time, they kind of alter a little bit.
At least did.
Yeah. That's very true. And Beth Ann Lewis always played as that link player in a group of two, often actually playing with Niamh Jones, her partner, in those, which is nice. I think we need more of that across rugby, is just put a pairing together in a 1-3-2-2 system. However, she's really good at that role, both as a link player and in terms of just blasting breakdowns on her own. Yeah. And she did that extremely well, being that player kind of between an edge forward and kind of in a grouping, that she was able to float really well. I think she had an outstanding game at that. And you mentioned there, that there was that extra break, the 11 minutes into the game, I think it was, that they paused. And before that, when both Tambua Tuanakavadra had that try disallowed on the edge for obstruction, where Tia Hines kind of went behind a player and then gave it. And also the Annabelle Cody try, which was scored. Yep. From a Welsh perspective, you were looking at that and going, oh God, it's exactly the same as it's always been.
It's the same as before. It's the same as you think of WXV last year, the year before that. Australia have been a real bogey team for Wales, a team they should have beaten a few times, and every time they slipped up. Similar to Wales men back a decade or so earlier. They were just like a really horrid team for them to play. And then it felt like you kind of had that broken. They beat them for the first time ever at Rodney Parade last year in the final play. Like, I was there, it was great scenes, it was a really good night for it. But then, a week later, they travel out and play them in WXV and they get absolutely honked. Yeah. And there's a chance they're playing a second test on Friday at 10 a.m. It's on the BBC or Stan Sport, depending on where you are. Well worth watching. And that second test, hopefully, we can see Wales back it up and push on a bit. Because I think this was the best and most comprehensive performance they put in for a long time. I thought defensively, they were excellent. They were really, really good. As ever, it's a Wales game, so Alex Callender was the best player on the pitch.
Unbelievable.
She was just absolutely brilliant.
Yeah.
I thought Bethan Lewis was exceptional as well.
Yeah.
She was back to her best. I think she'd really built into a brilliant international player.
Looks at home in that 7 jersey, doesn't she? I think them swapping that back row around has really paid off because Alex Callender, it's very similar to the way we talk about Jack Morgan in the men's team, in that Callon is the word, right, yes, for Alex Callender. But she's the best jackler, she's the best tackler, and she's the best carrier in this Wales team. And the best liner option, the best at a lot of things, right? But playing her at 8, it's very similar to how Ireland use Aoife Wafer, where at scrum time, they say, brilliant, you can carry everything here. However, in defence, they give her a real licence to just go after any breakdown. Instead of typically when they've had, for example, Joyce Butcher's playing at 8, or even when Bethan Lewis has played there and Georgia Evans has played there, even back to when they had Sean Harris playing there a couple of years ago, they had kind of a set role for how they would use their back row and all of these. But when it's Alex Callender, they've just completely scrapped that. And Sean Lynn's put loads of trust in her. She's the captain now as well, finally. And they've clearly gone, right, you can just go after any breakdown that you see fit. You can go and blast any ruck that you see. You can mouth off to people. You can hit people. Do whatever it is you like. And I really like that because Georgia Evans and Bethan Lewis work really cohesively together in that game, whereas Alex Callender just got to go around and be a shithouse, which is what she's good at. Yeah, and you can tell they've really drilled the defence. Yeah. Dan Murphy came in as defence coach during the Six Nations. Wales had never had a defence coach before that, and it showed a lot of the time. I think Sean Lynn said that he was astonished by how poor a lot of the detail in the defence was in the system they were running previously. Yeah. So Murphy came in partly because he was scrum coach at Gloucester Hartpury, right? And he could do both jobs. They brought in someone because they wouldn't fund both separately, someone who could be a scrum coach and a defence coach and work on both areas. And we saw the scrum, was a bit more up and down, but worked worse fundamentally there. But the way in which they were incredibly active in the defence, the conditions remained horrible even once the pitch was playable again. And really pleasing things here was got the defence right, which has been the real frustration in the last few years, that there have been times in which, because the system has been so reliant on getting into that kind of 13 channel, right, on one catch-up defender and 2 on 13, because Hannah Jones is a very smart defender, but she doesn't have a great deal of pace. Yeah. And so quite regularly, when they played a team like Scotland, like Ireland in past years, that was fine, and they'd get away with it. But then when they played England and the Black Ferns, they would get trounced because they have someone with proper pace in that 13 channel who could show her up. And then over the last few years, right, we've seen those teams develop those athletes, and suddenly everyone moved past Wales. That's it. Emma Orr, Eve Higgins, Georgie Fredericks, even who played in this game. Massively so. Yeah. So we've seen every team kind of catch up with that and overtake Wales, and I think they've worked out a system now that allows Dalla Valle, she is now rather than Hannah Jones, to play her best rugby and just be a smart defender. So they put less emphasis on her on that 13 channel. The line is much flatter, and everyone is working across. They're using, rather than relying on whoever's in system being, often it would end up being a prop, to be that kind of catch-up defender and work across. They're relying on Bethan Lewis primarily and Georgia Evans to do that work and allowing them to take some emphasis off the centres. I also think it's helped by the fact Courtney Keat had her best game for Wales. She was brilliant. She was superb. Both sides of the ball. Makes really good decisions indeed now. Yeah. She posted a Instagram reel about the off-season and what it was like behind the scenes and training and so on. And she talked through, went through the day in the life, right? But then she said, Sean has been breaking off training early every day, so that we do individual blocks based on he's been through all of our performances in the Six Nations and for club level, and gone, what do we need to work on personally? And for me, it was lines of running, it was decision making with the ball, and it was high ball. And those have been the problem areas in the game, right? Has been she drops the odd high ball, and often she will. Let's call them work-ons, you know. Yeah. But none of those look like issues this week. No. She had clearly worked on all of them. You look at the try, now Metcalf's first try, which is so well taken. Again, the sort of move Wales weren't running previously, right? And the detail that Lynn has added on top of what Sean Connor was doing in attack, which is
just the way in which they break off this scrum, they flash around from the blind side to catch Australia off guard. And the only attacker that is previous there, in Courtney Kate, runs that dummy line brilliantly. The little detail on how putting her hands up very realistically rather than barking for the ball and overdoing it.
Her timing as well.
Her timing
she doesn't overrun it.
Yeah.
That if Bevan hits her on the short line, then she's still like getting over the gain line and getting up to within an inch of the try line.
Yeah.
That's a great running line. You're going to mark that as an Australian?
Yeah. So it's a brilliant line. It allows Flaky George an extra second on the ball, which she then drops it out, and then Nell Metcalf hits her line perfectly.
Yeah. Flaky George's touch on this is gorgeous, isn't it? That she times it just right. She doesn't go so flat to the line that there's any pressure on her pass, but she doesn't give it so early that Australia can drift off. And Metcalf comes into the picture so late here and crashes over. And it's just like getting a half shoulder on that tackle makes all the difference there for Metcalf. And also, additionally, you look at Dalavalle's try in the second half, and again, it's just perfectly taken, like, off the back of the scrum. Alex Callender hits it straight from 8 to 10 here. Kira Bevan doesn't get in the way, I think, to her credit as well, because Flaky George has something called here. She doesn't need any delay on that. And Australia are marking really, really wide. And we'll come on to, I want to talk a little bit more about Flaky George's wider performance in a moment. But everybody's running genuinely threatening lines out the back here for Wales. Unfortunately, we don't have an overhead angle. I think that would be really good here to see exactly where everyone is, particularly Neumann and Metcalf out wide. But at this point, Australia are so stressed in covering the wide spaces that Flaky George, I presume it's actually Hannah Dallavalle who spots this in the backfield and calls for the grubber in behind. But the waiting on this from George is beautiful. And Dallavalle has enough pace to go there and finish it. I think it's beautifully taken from the whole back line. And also a great scrum by Wales. That's another big part of the game. Maisie Davis, absolutely brilliant.
Maisie is brilliant for 20-year-old.
Gen Z Gethin Jenkins is what I'm getting out of her. That she is absolute nails.
Yeah, she was superb. And again, comes back to Sean Lynn essentially used the Six Nations as a free hit.
Yeah.
And there were players blooded in that Maisie Davis did not perform like that if it's still her first test start. Instead, she played a few games in the Six Nations.
No prop plays well on their first test start. No. You have to give them a baptism of fire.
And so she's now built into a test-worthy player over having a Six Nations of pain.
Yeah.
And that's built up now, and now you go into a World Cup with more options available than just relying on Gwenfie and Pearce to play 80 minutes every week.
The other thing you mentioned Dan Murphy coming in as defence coach. They've also this summer brought in Ben Flower to be the collision coach. And everyone, myself included, looked at that and went, what the fuck is a collision coach? But you know what? Wales looked really aggressive.
Everyone looked at that and went, like, we know the kind of collisions Ben Flower's famous for.
Yes, that's very true.
Those?
That's very true. But Wales did look really aggressive in the carry and particularly flying off the line in a way that, I don't know, I think a lot of the Welsh players have needed that kind of fire in the belly, and there is a bit of that. And then you bring that back to in defence. Like you mentioned, there was no issues out wide with Dallavalle connecting with Joyce outsider and Neumann outsider and Keaton are inside as well, and them introducing backs into that defence, something Australia actually are really, really good at, and brings back that importance of what you're saying of having an edge forward who's hitting those and getting the likes of Ashley Masters out of the game. Like, how quiet was Ashley Masters as one of the best back row forwards in the game for over a decade now? Emily Chancellor as well. I think Wales.
Emily Chancellor was good.
She was very good. And the thing is, they kept her good in like the tight carries and all of the like the little nuts and bolts that she does really well. And you never see Emily Chancellor have a bad game, right? But stopping her from having a world-class dominant game, main character energy game, which is what she usually has, you know? And again, like, the most important thing from a Welsh perspective in terms of who was kept quiet is that key player out wide, Georgie Fredericks, that she was getting the ball and she was just getting chopped left, right and centre, that she wasn't getting loads of time on the ball. And what I was really impressed with from a Welsh defensive perspective wasn't necessarily just like making big hits, making big reads. It was, how can we close that space down before Frederick get the ball, but without getting ahead of the ball and leaving space out wide where our wingers can't cover it, you know? And I think part of that does come down to the swap they've made at the back with Jasmine Joyce Butchers, here she is, sadly broken, moving out to the wing from fullback and putting Metcalf at the back. Metcalf, I think, covered the ground superbly.
Was player of the match and was excellent.
So good.
She was very, very good.
Yeah.
And in terms of both her ability to cover the ground, but also to run the ball back, but critically, a kicking game.
Yes.
Right? Which is the one area that Jasmine Joyce Butchers, brilliant player in so many regards, you know, incredibly quick, incredibly lively with the ball, defensively so good in position.
A very necessary player in this Welsh squad,
But she has a decent boot on her, but she doesn't use it.
No.
You know, it's always been a frustration for me.
It's usually attacking kicks like seven style rather than...
And I always wish she would kick the ball more. And now Metcalf coming in and just having a bit of a cannon she can use, complementing Flaky George, who I thought was great.
Yeah.
And we finally saw the kind of Gloucester Hartbury Flaky George playing for Wales.
Yeah.
That she kicked a lot of the ball. I'm really hoping, from Wales' perspective, it wasn't just the conditions.
Yeah.
And it was, this is how they're going to play now, is Flaky George kicking very long, looking to dominate territory, using the fact the defence is very strong now, and you've got Alex Callender and Beth Ann Lewis as great turnover merchants. You know, George Evans as well. You've got a few more who can kind of do that role. The likes of Kate Williams to come back in as well, to target those turnovers and target knock-ons, which they managed to force an awful lot of as well in these conditions.
Yeah. I remember last year in the Celtic Challenge when Nell Metcalf was playing at fullback for Gwalior Lightning. I remember looking at the way she kicked there because her distance at that level was ludicrous. Yeah. And looking at that and kind of going like, oh, she might be Wales's like James Lowe in terms of like a left footer you can drop to the back and just bang it long, right? And this was the first time we've seen Wales kind of have that role baked into their team, going, actually, let's think about this. We've got a left-footed kicker. We've got somebody who can bang it long. In Bevan and in George, we've got two people who like to kick very differently. And that's what I really liked, because under Cunningham, Wales liked to kick a lot of the ball, but they did it almost exclusively off 9. Yeah. Because at the time, they'd built large parts of their attack around Eleanor Snowsill. Snowsill then retired about a year out from the end of the Cunningham era. And I felt like Wales was still baked around Snowsill, even though Flaky George is an extremely different player.
Yeah.
But this time I feel like it is a bit more general in terms of, well, it's a bit more based on the personnel they've now got, right? Bevan, extremely good at contestables. Mm-hmm. If the back three are sitting really, really deep, you get Bevan to put those in, because Joyce Butcher's really, really good in the air.
She only hung one all day.
Yeah.
Right? Put through one roll and one contestable kick all day.
Yep, exactly.
That wasn't what the situation was calling for.
Because instead, they had Flaky George going for length.
It felt like Wales had it in mind they wanted to kick the ball, but they were very situational on it.
Yeah.
And they weren't going, as per the Cunningham era, of, okay, we know we've got a weapon in Kira Bevan's boot, so we'll rely on that all the time, or we've got a game plan that relies on this.
Yeah.
It wasn't that. It was, we're looking up and we're going, we want to play territory, or we're spotting something in the backfield.
Yeah.
You know, we're spotting that Hal sees in a weird position or something, and we can catch her out.
And that was it with Flaky George's kicking game. I think that was the most satisfying thing. As you said earlier, it was the Gloucester Hartbury, Flaky George, where with both her and Mo Hunt at Gloucester Hartbury, and the whole back line, frankly, they like to just trust them to kick for space, to spot things in the backfield. And that was what it felt like. And that is kind of multiplied when the weather conditions are like they were, because you only need to find a bit of space. Because if you can stretch the fullback, as you mentioned, like Caitlin House getting constantly bombed all the time with, you know, really difficult scuddering kicks, they're really difficult to catch. And if you're not spot on in your footing and your, you know, your technique in them, you will at least like slip, or you will drop it backwards, or you'll get close to the touchline, or you'll give the opposition player time to catch up on you. And Neumann was brilliant on that wing, chasing those kicks, as was Joyce Butchers and Metcalf when they were sent after them. And that was really satisfying. It felt like it was a natural game being played by Flaky George, rather than something she was... Obviously, they'll have trained it and so on, but it didn't feel like she was just doing it because this is what the system tells me to do.
It wasn't robotic,
Yeah, that's it.
We should talk about the Wallaroos.
We should.
Because this was a weird performance from them.
Yeah.
Joe Yapp said after the game, their coach, that this wasn't us. And this was not us, and she's really excited to get another chance to have a crack at the same opposition next week, and was hugely disappointed. So she didn't kind of see the performance coming, and so it was just very flat.
Yeah.
And I think that's fair. I think they struggled with conditions. I think they went out looking to play a far more expansive and adventurous game than they got. How many times did we see them try and run out of their own 22 or their own half anyway, and knock the ball on and drop it? How many handling errors? It felt enormous.
They gave out a lot of freebies, for sure.
Tuanaka Vajra was often relied on as a big carry, and she dropped a lot of balls. Yeah. And when you're in that situation where you're trying to get someone to give you go forward, and they're knocking the ball on, it becomes very difficult to do anything or play off anything. They're obviously missing a couple of players, like Maya Stewart's got an injury, Binay Charita picked up an injury against Fiji, and I think they're now like doubting she'll make the World Cup, which is a shame. So there was some firepower missing out wide when they did create those chances, but those chances were very few and far between. They looked very flat and very well contained from the Welsh defence once they got beyond sort of 10 minutes. Yeah,
and another player that they were missing out, who's quite a key one, is Cara Stallinger at number 10. As well as, of course, like In past, they've often gone for Arabella Mackenzie playing throughout the back line, often at 10, and instead going with Tia Hines here.
I thought Tia Hines had a good game.
She was very good, very good. I think made generally quite good decisions.
And Layla Morgan as well at 9, alongside her, I think she was maybe the standout for the Wallaroos.
Yeah, she's always
alongside Chancellor, who I thought
good.
Was herself.
But yeah, with Dallinger, I feel like the thing that they missed out on was a player in that back line who goes, I don't care about the conditions. We've still got to play like we're the Wallaroos, you know?
Yeah.
And I think the decisions that Hines was making individually were really good, but I don't think there was somebody there to go, right, we're going to call this out the back and then play short off the back of that, and we're going to play this structure and this structure. Somebody who's got that experience of doing that at international level. And it was a funny one because partly the Wallaroos were going into the shell and just playing off 9 and carrying it up from there on out. And it's a funny one because, as I say, we go back to how good the Welsh defence was and the fact they were making errors. Potentially, it was just a response to that of going, well, because we're making errors and we're dropping balls, why would we start playing wide? But it's a double-edged sword, isn't it, with that. But the big positive is, in Tia Hines, they've got a really good other option at 10 who brings something a bit different to a Mackenzie or a Dallinger does. So, yeah, I think with the next test coming up on Friday, I do not anticipate the Wallaroos will play at all like that. I think it'll be a very different game. I think they will be a lot better.
I think they'll be a lot better for the weather being right. I think they seem like a team who can only play one way, which is very expansive and very attacking and very open.
Yeah.
And it's great to watch when it's working, but when you end up in conditions like that, it's a struggle.
It takes a feather out the cap when they don't have that.
Going into a World Cup, kind of having it exposed to you that you can, and exposed particularly to oppositions, that your game goes down several notches when the conditions get worse. You think about that night in Rodney Parade, back last year, and the conditions were much worse than they were the following week, right? You then end up in sunshine and lovely weather, and suddenly they're 10 times better. Yeah. And I think we saw the Wallaroos expose a little bit. Their game is quite one-dimensional, but what a dimension, Yeah. What a trick they've got.
And also, you do say that, they still scored their Tuanakavandra try off a maul.
Yeah.
So they do have that up their sleeve
They've
as well.
got a power game to them, absolutely.
Yeah,
They don't. Their kicking game looked not quite. It wasn't. It was just kicking game, right?
Yeah.
And they were quite easily outdone at the kicking game by a team they should be beating.
For sure.
And they should have been beating over recent results, and Wales obviously improved and were much better. But it's an interesting one for the Wallaroos, and I think it does set them up for an interesting place for the World Cup because they are excellent at the thing they do, but we've now seen a pretty clear game plan of how any of the teams who are realistically looking at this quarter-final berths can beat them.
We've learned that the Wallaroos aren't limitless.
Yeah.
We'll put it that way. And with Wales, I don't want to get too carried away because this is just one win and there's a World Cup round the corner, that there are teams who've had several this year who will be kind of leaning into that. But it's exciting. As I say, it's performance more than win. And don't get me wrong, Wales have had a lot of their best performance in the last couple of years have come from losses, and that makes it more frustrating. But I do hope there's a bit of monkey off back, especially when you consider, as we mentioned, a lot of the key players in that team having much better and more composed games. And Kelsey Jones' 50th cap as well. Congratulations.
And she was superb.
She was brilliant. Yeah. And particularly at line-out time, in those conditions, do not underestimate how difficult that is. Yeah. And she was pretty much spotless.
Yeah. One last question.
Yeah.
Right? Going into the World Cup, if you imagine both teams are in the same pool with the same teams, hypothetically, right? Which team would you rather be? Wales or Australia here?
I mean, off the back of that, obviously Wales, because they won the game. But also, in more general context, I'd probably say Australia. Yeah. It's unlikely that the game will be played in those conditions in sunny Sunderland, and Exeter and wherever else. Hull. York. They're playing some games into it.
Brighton.
Yeah.
London.
But, Manchester. I think if I were Australia, my point is if I were Joey Up, I wouldn't be panicking. That is one game that they've lost where a lot of things have gone against them.
Now,
and it's been a poor day at the office for them.
If the weather is better and they lose again on Friday, then you have to ask some questions.
Yes.
She is leaving after the World Cup anyway. I wonder if there's some hangover of that, of the players being a bit like, there's some element of that. I don't know. It's an interesting one.
Yeah.
There's more to come. Plenty more women's rugby stuff to come up. Obviously, we've got the World Cup very much on the horizon. Yeah. Wally, what were your real takeaways?
I love Annabelle Cardi, mate.
Yeah. Her dad, of course, sent off in this fixture against Wales.
Hell yeah.
In the 87 World Cup.
He was robbed, mate.